It was one of those late autumn nights when the air feels damp, clinging to your skin like an invisible film. Emma sat at the bus stop alone, hugging her coat tighter around her shoulders. The glow of the street lamp above flickered every so often, humming like an old refrigerator about to break down. She had missed the earlier bus after working overtime at her bookstore job, and now she was waiting for the last route of the night, the infamous 11:45 p.m. bus. Her coworkers always joked about it, calling it the ghost bus because almost no one took it, and those who did never seemed to ride it more than once. Emma used to laugh at that, dismissing it as just another urban legend. Tonight, though, she wasn't laughing. The street was eerily quiet. When the bus finally arrived, its headlights cut through the fog like two pale eyes. The vehicle lumbered toward her with a groan, as though reluctant to keep going. Emma climbed on board, scanning the dimly lit interior. The driver didn't greet her. He just stared forward, his face half hidden in shadow beneath the brim of his cap. Emma slid into a seat halfway down the aisle. She noticed right away how cold it was inside. The heater didn't seem to be running, and the windows were covered in condensation, like the breath of something unseen. She tried to shake off the feeling, convincing herself that all buses felt this way late at night. There were only 3 other passengers. A woman sat near the back, her head tilted toward the window as though she were asleep, though Emma never saw her chest rise with breath. A man in a dark coat sat 2 rows ahead, his hands folded stiffly in his lap, staring straight ahead without blinking. The last passenger was a boy, maybe 16, clutching an old backpack tightly to his chest. He glanced at Emma once, his wide eyes shimmering with something close to fear, before quickly looking away. The silence among them was oppressive. No one shifted in their seat. No one coughed. No one made the usual small noises of life. It felt like sitting among statues. The bus rumbled through the deserted streets, passing dark storefronts and houses with their windows shut tight. Every so often, Emma caught her own reflection in the fogged glass, pale and ghostly, as if she didn't belong in the world outside. The driver never stopped for red lights, and yet no cars appeared on the road to challenge him. When Emma finally glanced at the glowing digital clock above the driver's seat, her chest tightened. It still read 11:45. She frowned, telling herself maybe the clock was broken. But when she checked her phone, the screen blinked the same time back at her, 11:45. A prickling chill crawled up her spine. Emma leaned forward, her voice tentative. "Excuse me, do you know when the next stop is?" she asked the driver. He didn't respond. His head tilted slightly, as though he had heard, but his hands never left the wheel. She glanced at the boy clutching his backpack, hoping for some normalcy. He whispered, almost too low to hear, "You shouldn't be on this bus." Before Emma could reply, the bus shuddered violently, plunging into a stretch of road lined with tall, leafless trees. The world outside the windows grew darker still, until it looked less like night and more like the edge of nothingness. Emma's hand tightened around the seat in front of her, heart pounding with the realization. She wasn't on the bus she thought she'd boarded. The bus's headlights cut an anemic path through the void, as if even light itself was reluctant to travel this road. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her, but when she checked it, the screen glitched, a smear of static and distorted shapes, before freezing completely. She tried to restart it, but the power button wouldn't respond. The driver's shoulders shifted slightly, a twitch so subtle she wondered if she'd imagined it. The boy clutched his backpack tighter, his knuckles white. The silent woman in the back had not moved even once, and Emma thought she saw the faintest wisp of fog curling around her head inside the bus, though that made no sense. The bus slowed suddenly without stopping, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Outside, the trees appeared to stretch taller, their bare branches reaching toward the bus like skeletal fingers. Emma peered out the window but could no longer see a recognizable landscape, just endless woods and patches of darkness that seemed to ripple. Her stomach turned over when she noticed that the same crooked tree with a lightning scar passed by 3 times in succession, as if the bus was looping through the same stretch of road. She swallowed hard and spoke louder this time. "Driver, are we lost?" No answer, not even a flinch. The silence pressed against her ears. A soft sound broke through, a whisper. At first Emma thought it was the wind threading through the bus's seams, but then she realized it was coming from inside. The boy was murmuring something under his breath, his eyes squeezed shut. She strained to catch the words and finally made out, "Don't look at her, don't look at her." Emma followed his gaze, not to the driver, but to the woman in the back. The woman's head was no longer pressed to the window. It was facing forward now, perfectly aligned with Emma's eyes. Her face was impossibly pale, her lips slightly parted, and though her eyes were half closed, Emma felt as if something unseen was staring right through her. The man in the dark coat shifted for the first time, turning his head incrementally to look down the aisle. His movements were mechanical, like a rusty machine coming to life after years of dormancy. Emma's breath hitched. The bus jolted suddenly, making the lights flicker. For a split second, in that strobe-like flash, Emma thought she saw more shapes in the seats, rows of blurred faces, passengers that hadn't been there before. When the lights stabilized, the seats were empty again, save for the four of them. Emma's pulse hammered in her throat. She gripped the cold metal pole beside her seat, grounding herself, but the pole felt oddly soft, almost like flesh, before returning to normal. "Why is this happening?" Emma whispered, more to herself than anyone. The boy opened his eyes, wide with terror. "It doesn't stop until someone gets off," he said, his voice barely audible. "But there's no stop unless," he trailed off, shaking his head violently. The driver finally spoke then, his voice low and gravelly, almost reverberating through the bus walls. "Next stop. Choice." The bus began to slow, its brakes squealing like a wounded animal. Outside the windows, a dimly lit clearing appeared, surrounded by towering trees. A battered wooden sign stood at its edge, but the fog was too thick for Emma to read it. Her gut told her whatever decision she made next would matter far more than she could comprehend. The bus exhaled a hiss of steam as it stopped, the sound unnervingly similar to a sigh of relief. Emma hesitated, her fingers frozen around the pole. Outside, the clearing was barely visible through the swirling fog, but she could make out a crooked wooden sign leaning to one side. The headlights illuminated just enough to reveal chipped paint and strange scratches etched into the wood. The boy's warning echoed in her mind. "It doesn't stop unless." She turned to him, but he looked away, staring at the floor as though eye contact might shatter him. The driver's voice rasped again. "Choice." The woman in the back seat finally moved. The shift was so slow and deliberate it seemed impossible for a living body to move that way. She stood, her hair falling forward to veil most of her face, and took a step toward Emma without a sound. The man in the coat followed suit, his joints cracking like brittle wood. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. She considered bolting toward the clearing, but something in her gut told her that outside was no safer. The bus felt like a cage, yet stepping off it felt like stepping into something hungrier. Emma's gaze darted back to the window. She leaned closer to read the sign, wiping the condensation with her sleeve. The scratches formed words she could barely make out. "Take only what you need." Beneath it, faint letters seemed burned into the wood. "Leave the rest or follow forever." A shiver crawled down her spine. She thought of the clock that refused to change, of the endless road looping like a broken record. Maybe this wasn't a bus route at all. Maybe it was a trap, one that required a sacrifice or a decision no one wanted to make. The boy finally looked up, his wide eyes meeting Emma's. "If you go," he whispered, "don't look back. They don't like that." His voice cracked on the last word. Emma's throat was dry. "Who are they?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the straps of his backpack to his chest and took a trembling step toward the aisle. The driver watched, expressionless, hands still on the wheel. The air inside the bus had grown heavier, as though the fog outside had seeped through the windows and settled in their lungs. The bus doors creaked open, revealing the clearing like a stage set for a play no one wanted to watch. A faint wind swept in, carrying the smell of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. Emma's legs felt weak as she stood. Behind her, the woman and the man advanced slowly, their footsteps unnervingly soft against the metal floor. She realized, with a cold certainty, that if she stayed, they would corner her. But stepping off might mean surrendering to something worse. Somewhere in the fog beyond the sign, a faint sound, a child's laugh, echoed briefly before vanishing. Emma swallowed hard, tightened her grip on her bag, and stepped forward, leaving the bus's flickering light behind. Emma stepped onto the clearing's damp ground, her shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. The fog swallowed the bus's light almost immediately, leaving her surrounded by a pale gray haze. Behind her, the hiss of the bus's doors closing sounded final, like a lock turning. She could still make out its faint shape through the fog, but the driver, the woman, and the man were silhouettes now, motionless and watchful. The boy stepped off behind her, shoulders hunched. The clearing was silent except for the distant rustle of branches above. It felt less like nature and more like something holding its breath. The crooked wooden sign loomed over her now. Up close, Emma saw that the scratches forming the words weren't random. They were desperate carvings, letters dug deep into the grain by shaking hands. The burned message beneath, "Leave the rest or follow forever," looked older, almost charred into the wood decades ago. Beneath the sign sat a small wooden box, barely visible in the fog. Its lid was slightly ajar, revealing a dark interior. Emma crouched carefully and peered inside. At first, she thought it was empty, but then she noticed small objects: a child's marble, a tarnished ring, a frayed photograph. Each item seemed insignificant, but they pulsed with an odd weight, like memories that had been abandoned. The boy spoke, startling her. "Everyone leaves something," he said, his voice steadier now but filled with sorrow. "Something important. Something that hurts." Emma turned to him. "What happens if we don't?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Then the road keeps you." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press him. Instead, she looked again at the box. She thought of her father's wristwatch in her bag, one of the few things she had left of him after he passed last year. The idea of placing it in that box made her chest ache, but something deep inside whispered that if she didn't, she might never leave this place. That a faint movement flickered at the edge of the clearing, just a shift of shadow at first, but then something elongated, humanoid, began to emerge. Emma's breath hitched as she watched it pause just beyond the sign. Its shape was vague, a silhouette of a figure taller than any person she'd seen, its head tilting unnaturally as if trying to understand her. The boy lowered his gaze and whispered, "Don't acknowledge them. They're watching to see if we obey." Emma tore her eyes away, fixing her stare on the box instead. Her pulse thudded in her ears, each beat loud enough to drown out the clearing's silence. Emma's fingers trembled as she unzipped her bag and retrieved the watch. Its familiar weight felt almost alive in her palm, a tether to a life that now seemed impossibly far away. She hesitated. If she gave this up, what would she have left of her father? But the longer she stood there, the more oppressive the air became, as though the fog itself was closing in. The boy reached into his backpack, pulling out a small, weathered journal. Without hesitation, he dropped it into the box. A soft wind stirred, carrying the faintest sound, a whisper, distant but unmistakable. "Take only what you need." Emma swallowed hard, fighting tears, and stepped closer to the box, knowing the choice she made now might determine if she ever saw another sunrise. Emma lingered over the wooden box, the watch heavy in her palm like an anchor to her past. The boy stood close, his breath shallow but steady now, as if he'd resigned himself to the rules of this place. The fog seemed thicker, pressing inward until the clearing felt as small as a room. From somewhere in the mist, a twig snapped, not loud, but deliberate. Emma glanced toward the sound, but remembered the boy's warning, "Don't look at them." She forced her gaze back to the box, even as every instinct screamed to check the darkness. She lowered the watch into the box, the metal making a faint, almost mournful clink. The moment she released it, the clearing exhaled. Branches swayed though no wind touched them, and the fog shifted slightly, revealing just a hint of the bus's headlights in the distance. Relief pricked at her chest until she realized the box now contained more than it had before. Nestled beside the marble and ring was a scrap of fabric, pale blue, frayed at the edges. Emma didn't recognize it, but the boy flinched when he saw it, stepping back as if burned. "That wasn't there," he whispered, voice cracking that a low hum vibrated through the ground, subtle at first but growing steadily louder. Emma's teeth buzzed against one another, and she pressed her hands to her ears. The fog thickened again, swirling violently as the shadowy figure at the clearing's edge began to move closer. Its limbs seemed to stretch unnaturally long, joints bending backward. Behind it, more shapes began to emerge, half-seen silhouettes that never fully formed. always dissolving back into mist before she could focus on them. The boy grabbed her arm. "We have to go," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. They ran toward the faint glow of the bus, but the fog played tricks on their senses. The lights shifted, doubling, and then splitting into multiple points, like reflections in broken glass. Emma's feet stumbled over unseen roots, but the boy steadied her. The whispers returned, dozens of voices layered over one another, some speaking words she couldn't understand, others murmuring phrases she could. Leave, take, forever, follow. The air was icy now, each breath cutting like a blade. Emma fought the urge to glance over her shoulder, remembering the boy's warning. But curiosity tugged at her like invisible hands. Just as she reached the bus, something cold brushed her neck, a touch so light it could have been missed, yet it felt deliberate. She almost turned to look, but stopped herself at the last second. The bus doors opened on their own, and she and the boy scrambled inside. The interior looked unchanged at first glance, but as the doors closed, Emma noticed the woman and the man were no longer seated where they had been. In their places were two new passengers, a little girl clutching a pale blue scrap of fabric, the same one that had appeared in the box, and an old man whose eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Emma's stomach dropped. Whatever rules governed this place had shifted, and the road ahead felt far from safe. The doors hissed shut behind Emma and the boy, sealing them once more inside the dimly lit bus. The air felt heavier than before, tinged with a faint metallic tang that made Emma's tongue taste like pennies. The seats creaked softly under invisible weight as the vehicle lurched forward. The headlights carved through the fog, but the road outside seemed unfamiliar. Taller trees, deeper shadows, and an occasional glimmer of movement between the trunks. Emma clutched a pole for balance, her heart still pounding from the clearing. The boy avoided looking at the two new passengers, but Emma couldn't help stealing glances to the little girl sat 3 rows back. Her pale fingers knotted in the blue fabric scrap. Her eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the flicker of the bus lights. She never blinked. Beside her, the old man leaned slightly forward, his faintly glowing eyes fixed on the aisle ahead. They didn't breathe, shift, or fidget, no subtle signs of life. Emma realized the bus was completely silent again, save for the hum of the engine. Even the driver remained motionless except for his hands on the wheel. For a fleeting moment, Emma felt like the bus itself was alive and the driver merely its puppet. The boy inched closer to Emma and whispered, "They weren't supposed to be here yet." His voice cracked as he spoke, and he tightened his grip on the seat back like a lifeline. Emma swallowed her fear. "What do you mean yet?" she asked quietly. The boy shook his head. "The ones who leave something, they change the path, change who rides. It's never the same twice. But 2 replacements, that's wrong. That's too fast." His gaze darted toward the glowing eyes of the old man, then back to Emma. "Something's angry." The bus jerked suddenly, throwing them off balance. Emma crashed into a seat, the impact jarring her shoulder. The lights flickered again, plunging the interior into darkness for a heartbeat. In that flash of blackness, Emma heard a sound, a giggle, high-pitched and echoing, but distant and muffled, as though it came from inside a dream. When the lights flickered back on, the little girl was no longer on her seat. The blue fabric scrap lay on the floor where she had been. The old man hadn't moved, but now his head was tilted just slightly in Emma's direction, and his glowing eyes were narrower, like slit. The boy grabbed Emma's hand, his palms clammy. "Don't let go," he said urgently. The bus accelerated unnaturally, the outside world blurring into streaks of gray and black. The windows began to fog over again, this time from the outside, as if something was breathing against them. Shapes pressed faintly against the glass, indistinct hands or faces, impossible to tell. A whisper coiled through the aisle, soft but unmistakable. "Next stop. Det." Emma's stomach sank. The driver didn't speak this time. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The rules had changed again, and whatever waited at the next stop was already reaching for them. The bus's acceleration leveled out, but the world outside remained a dizzying blur of gray and black. Emma's grip on the boy's hand tightened as the aisle lights flickered weakly, struggling to hold back the darkness pressing against the windows. The abandoned blue fabric scrap twitched once on the floor, though no breeze stirred the air. The old man's glowing eyes had dimmed, but they followed Emma's every small movement. The silence on board was no longer simply stillness. It was the kind of quiet that feels watched, as though the very walls of the bus were listening. Emma tried to focus on her breathing, counting each inhale and exhale, but a faint scratching began beneath her seat. It was rhythmic at first, almost like the sound of a pencil on paper. Then it grew louder, sharper, until she felt the vibration through the soles of her shoes. She leaned slightly forward to peek beneath the seat, but the boy tugged her back sharply. "Don't," he hissed. His voice quavered, and when she met his eyes, she saw fresh fear there. "They make you curious, so you'll look. That's how they choose." The bus slowed abruptly, nearly throwing them forward. Outside, through the streaked and foggy windows, Emma caught glimpses of warped buildings, structures that seemed half-finished, their walls bending at impossible angles. A dim sign flickered in and out of view, though she could barely read it. "Debt." The word pulsed like a heartbeat. The door groaned open, but no one stood outside. Instead, an icy wind swept through the aisle, carrying the faint sound of dozens of coins clinking together. The boy's hand trembled in hers. "This is where they test what you owe," he whispered. Something invisible stepped onto the bus. The floor dipped slightly beneath an unseen weight. The lights dimmed to a faint orange glow, and a low hum filled the air. A cold sensation brushed past Emma's arm, like fingers grazing her sleeve. She felt a tug at her bag, gentle at first, then insistent, as if unseen hands were rifling through her belongings. A soft voice, high and childlike, whispered close to her ear, "What did you steal?" Emma's mind raced. She thought of the watch she'd given up, of her father's memory, of the life she'd left behind tonight. But she had stolen nothing. Had she? The bus lurched again, the door still open to nothing but swirling fog. Shapes began pressing against the windows. Dozens of faces, some distorted beyond recognition, some eerily familiar. For a moment, Emma thought she saw her father's features among them, lips moving soundlessly. The old man stood now, slowly rising without a sound, and faced the door. His glowing eyes flared brighter, and his mouth opened impossibly wide as he stepped toward the open threshold. The boy's voice cracked as he whispered urgently to Emma, "Whatever happens next, don't answer them." A chorus of whispers filled the bus then, weaving together like a chant. "Pay what you owe, pay what you owe." The chorus of whispers rose to a shivering crescendo, wrapping around Emma like icy threads. The bus's floor seemed to tilt slightly, though the wheels stayed perfectly on the invisible road. The open door gaped like a mouth into the fog. Emma could almost swear that faint coin-shaped lights swirled outside, glinting like stars caught in water. The old man didn't step through the door. Instead, he pivoted toward Emma and the boy, his glowing eyes flickering as if replaying memories. A shape like the little girl flickered briefly beside him, her form ghost-like and translucent. "Pay what you owe," the whispers said again, but this time they carried distinct voices. Emma's father's baritone, her boss's tired sigh, her own voice on nights she had promised herself she would call him and never did. The memories pressed inward, vivid and sharp. The last night she saw her dad alive, when she'd ignored his call because she was too tired, and the regret that had eaten at her since. The old man raised one trembling hand, and between his fingers appeared Emma's father's wristwatch, the very one she had placed in the box. It glimmered as though freshly polished. The boy gasped and stepped backward, his backpack slipping from his shoulder. The air thickened, and the bus's windows fogged further, obscuring the outside world completely. Then the unseen scratching returned, louder now, emanating from under every seat. Emma's heart raced as coins, real, tarnished coins, began to tumble from the overhead compartments, clattering onto the aisle floor in a metallic rain. They rolled toward Emma's feet, circling her shoes like predators. She realized this wasn't about stolen money. It was about stolen chances, stolen time. The boy shouted suddenly, his voice cracking. "We gave what we could. You can't take more." His words echoed unnaturally, warping as if the bus itself mocked him. The old man didn't respond. Instead, the little girl's ghost-like form flickered closer, her blue scrap dragging across the floor, leaving a faint, glowing trail. She stopped in front of Emma and tilted her head at an unnatural angle. "You could have said goodbye," The girl whispered, not in her own voice, but in Emma's father's. The weight of regret pressed so heavily on Emma's chest that she thought her ribs might snap. Emma bent to grab the boy's hand again, but as she did, something cold coiled around her ankle. A pale, semi-transparent hand slipping from under the seat. She yanked free with a gasp, stumbling backward. The whispers swelled again, angry now. "Pay what you OWE." The bus's lights flared bright white, blinding for an instant, and when Emma's vision cleared, the door had vanished. There was no way out, only rows of seats that seemed to stretch into infinity. Emma felt the boy squeeze her hand hard. His eyes darted around, wide and terrified. "They're changing the rules again," he whispered, voice shaking. "And they want more than just memories this time." The bus groaned like a living creature, metal straining as if under immense pressure. The rows of seats seemed to ripple and shift, stretching endlessly into a horizonless void. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears as the tarnished coins spiraled faster, clinking together in an urgent rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat. The boy squeezed her hand, his knuckles white. "It's trying to shake us," he said, his voice cracking. "It wants us to panic. Don't give it what it wants." But Emma felt her resolve slipping, the weight of regret clawing at her mind. The glowing-eyed old man stepped closer, his movements jerky and puppet-like. He extended her father's watch toward her, but the gesture felt less like an offering and more like a taunt. Behind him, the translucent girl multiplied. 2, then 3, then 5 copies of her, each whispering phrases from Emma's past. Their overlapping voices filled the aisle. "Too tired to talk. Tomorrow, maybe. I'll call later." Emma pressed her palms over her ears, but the words bored into her skull like drills. The boy shouted into the cacophony, "Stop feeding it. Don't let it see you break." The bus's ceiling began to bow downward, the fluorescent lights bending like wax. From between the panels, more pale hands reached out, long, skeletal fingers scraping against the metal, showering sparks. One hand snagged Emma's hair, yanking her backward. She screamed, ripping free and stumbling toward the aisle. The boy grabbed a pole, swinging his backpack like a weapon to knock away another reaching limb. The coins clattered louder, forming spirals on the floor that converged toward the bus's center, where a dark fissure was beginning to split the aisle. The fissure widened, revealing nothing beneath, just an endless void of black. A powerful suction began to pull loose objects toward it, scraps of fabric, coins, even the blue scrap from the little girl's hands. Emma felt her body lurch toward the gap, her sneakers skidding on the slick floor. The boy anchored himself with one hand on a seat and reached for her with the other. "Jump seats," he shouted. "Climb, get off the floor." They scrambled onto the nearest row, perching on the cushions as the void consumed the aisle. The old man remained standing on the shifting floor as if gravity did not apply to him. He raised the watch once more and spoke in a voice that was many voices. "A debt unpaid is a life unclaimed." Emma's fear hardened into something sharper, defiance. She stared back at the old man, at the copies of the girl, at the writhing hands. "Then take what's already yours and let us go," she shouted. The bus shuddered violently, as though the very words had disrupted its rhythm. The fissure in the floor stopped widening, and for a fleeting moment, the whispers faltered. The boy seized the opportunity, swinging his backpack toward the old man's glowing eyes. The impact made no sound, but the old man flickered like a bad projection, vanishing into thin air. The bus lurched forward again, sealing the fissure as though nothing had happened. Emma collapsed onto the seat, shaking, but a sliver of hope pierced the terror. Perhaps they had bent the rules, if only for a moment. The bus steadied, its violent shaking subsiding into a low, steady hum. Emma and the boy clung to their seats, breathless, hearts thundering. The aisle was whole again, the coins gone, the fissure sealed. The lights flickered one last time before stabilizing. For the first time since she'd stepped on board, the windows began to clear, revealing a faint horizon, a suggestion of distant lights, maybe a town, or maybe a trick of the fog. Emma exhaled shakily. "Is it over?" she whispered. The boy didn't answer, his wary gaze still scanning the rows of seats. The bus slowed, its brakes screeching against pavement that Emma hadn't even realized was under them again. Outside, she could see streetlights, ordinary, yellow streetlights, and a familiar-looking road sign for her neighborhood. The driver still said nothing, but the digital clock above his seat flickered for the first time. 12:03 a.m. Relief washed over Emma, so suddenly it almost hurt. The bus door hissed open, and cool night air swept in, smelling of wet leaves and asphalt. Normal things, comforting things. Emma and the boy rose cautiously. As they moved toward the door, she glanced back down the aisle. The seats were empty now. No little girl, no old man, no glowing eyes. Just scuffed vinyl and metal poles. But as her gaze reached the very back row, she froze. The small wooden box from the clearing sat there, closed tightly. A single coin rested on its lid, gleaming faintly in the bus's lights. A faint whisper coiled through the air, so soft it could have been her imagination. Take only what you need. The boy nudged her gently. Don't touch it, he said quietly. She nodded, stepping off the bus. As her feet hit the solid sidewalk, the world seemed to regain color and sound. The distant hum of traffic, the chirp of crickets. Behind them, the bus idled for a moment longer. Emma turned just in time to see its headlights dim unnaturally, as if being swallowed by the fog. In the blink of an eye, the bus and its eerie driver vanished, leaving only an empty street under the flickering street lamp. Emma and the boy stood in silence for a long moment, their breath misting in the cool night air. Finally, Emma whispered, "We made it back." But even as she said the words, her pocket felt heavier. She reached inside and froze. Nestled against her fingers was her father's wristwatch, warm as if freshly wound. The boy caught her expression and frowned. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "it lets you think you've escaped." They walked down the empty street toward the safety of lights and people, but Emma knew she would never wait for the 11:45 p.m. bus again. Somewhere, in the fog behind them, the whispers stirred once more.